So the alternative to use cases comes up, and it's like kind of ironic because the use cases are probably the alternative to traditional requirements. But I'm gonna frame it this way because I want you to use cases by default, just to be fair. Um, where you might have existing requirements, but the alternative to that is you have some big text document. And there's a couple different ways I'll talk about capturing them, where you can use bullet points, which is probably a numbered list or a table or something like that, or what I'm going to call numbered shells. And so this is probably what you're going to see examples of in some of the other literature and some of the other books and stuff you'll see, as opposed to the use cases. So the bullet point approach to this is where we make individual discrete statements that give some rule about how the system's going to be built. There might be ordering to them. As I said, normally it's some sort of, instead of a bullet point exactly, it's an ordered list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But each numbered item needs to be testable in itself. I should be writing these things so I can look at one and say, as I look at it, I should know exactly the test case that I'm going to run for that thing. So that test case, so I read a requirement out there, and the requirement says, the system shall be testable. No, that's very vague. What the heck does that mean? The system shall. So what's testable mean? Shall allow users to modify backend data to create test cases. It's a little bit better. How about the system shall have an administration screen that allows user credentials to be modified by a test operator but not be available in the live production application. Okay, that's more specific. We can see if that thing exists, as opposed to testable, which is very vague. In non-functional requirements, and that's where even if you do use cases, you will have to write down bullet points or something like that. That's the place where these get the most vague. I often see the system shall be easy to use. Well, what the heck does that mean? What does easy to use mean? That means different things in different contexts. If I say an airline reservation system is easy to use, well, for your grandma, the easy to use is way different than the person who sits, at the terminal at the airlines, who's your helper, who knows everything about flights and how they're scheduled. So easy to use needs to be something a little bit more descriptive. So what is easy to use? Well, the system should include mouse and keyboard operations that clearly describe each next step that's involved, even if you don't know anything about the airline industry. That could be one definition of easy to use. It's at least more measurable. At least it sets who it's easy to use for and what the qualifications are. So that's what we want to capture there. Each one is testable, and each one should have, and we'll get to testing later on, but should have a good, clear, independent measure. We want to make sure that each one of them is separately marked so we can trace each one. So again, the bullet points probably are better to be numbered, but I don't want them to be all munched into paragraph. So often we put them in a table. So we have a table 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we capture them that way. You'll see that it's not traceability table. That's sometimes confused, where we make things, we try and write our requirements in the traceability, and that's because we haven't numbered them appropriately other places. But we do want them to be numbered. So for instance, we could write our requirements such as this. Again, I'm not using an ordered list here. I'm using a specific RQ1. What's RQ1? Well, RQ1 is some coding system I have for that, so requirement 1. It could be user interface, UI1. It could be our backend system, BS1. Sorry, I couldn't resist the pun right there. It's just a made-up system for being able to break up the system requirements. Often, I work in healthcare, health insurance these days. We'll often break up things based off of, is it claims? Is it membership? Is it the provider information? These different paths to breaking up the system is used to basically just give us a quick context for what part of the system are we talking about. So that's what we mean by the RQ. And then the 1, 2, 3, 4 is just some random ordering, some tracing. They don't necessarily have an intent to the order that this requirement comes before this one or is prioritized higher. It's just some way of being able to trace it later on. So again, the user interface shall be available for Android and iOS devices. Okay, that's fine. It's the worst thing to test. It's giving a context for this. I need to build an actual phone app. This is not necessarily the best requirement. The question is this an absolute requirement? If I did it through not devices, if I did it through a web page, is that a problem? There's a little bit of vagueness inside of here, but we might have had some CEO who says we must have platform device app. We can't use just web places. We want to be cool. I want an iPhone app I can download from the Apple iStore because that's what I've always wanted in life. So that's a very explicit requirement. So notice these requirements aren't necessarily perfect. I want to kind of talk about where they could or couldn't be accurate inside of here. Second requirement, the device and application shall be able to take and save pictures. Okay. Yeah, it's a functional need of the system. It doesn't tell me where or how. It does that. So from any place I'll take and save pictures. What do I do with the pictures when I take them and save them? But it's a capability. Okay, so we know when we write our little app here, we need to be able to take pictures with it. The system shall capture the following information about an object. And then it has a list of things that goes inside of there. Okay. Again, there's no context here. But it is vital information. So where do I capture them? There. This might be a business rule. It might be captured through a series of flows. The nice thing about these requirements is I'm cohesively gathering all the interesting stuff about, in this case, an object. And a little context here. These requirements are written assuming you're trying to create a little cell phone app that allows you to take pictures and put in information about a collection you have. I used to have a very extensive Star Wars collection, and I had a spreadsheet that had information much like this, and I ended up selling my Star Wars collection for a couple $1,000 based off of this data. I was able to throw it up online, and somebody went and looked at it and said, yeah, I'll buy that stuff, and went off and did their thing with it. But that's the idea behind this application, and so now I have one place where I can see everything about my system, where if I had use cases, perhaps this information would be spread out. I capture the picture in one flow, I capture the description in another flow, I get the price in a third flow. It's not necessarily cohesive. So that's the trade-off back and forth. Here I see everything in one spot, but I don't see the context in which it's used. In a use case, I see clearly what the user is trying to do, but maybe don't get a picture of the full system. So trying to piece together the different rules across different parts of the system. And so we can continue on here. The item shall be sortable and so on. This is the idea of requirements. Again, you can pause and look at these in a little bit more detail. If you have any questions about what these are, let me know. But as you're looking to capture requirements, they need to be appropriately high enough detail. Notice it doesn't say shall be sortable using a bubble sort algorithm, based off of the Java library, blah, blah, blah. That's implementation details. It's just saying it shall be sortable, however you want to sort it. Maybe you store them sorted. Maybe you sort them later on. Maybe you allow drop-down boxes to say sort by. Maybe you have click at the top of the table on the name and it can sort that way. It doesn't say how, it just says it shall be sortable. But at the same time, it's trying to be specific. I know I can test sortability by going off and whatever functionality you give me, I click it and I can see, do they sort them? So it's pretty explicitly that way. And then you can see the non-functional requirement, this, the number 7. The software shall limit the picture size sent to the server to be under 50K per picture. Okay, that's very specific, very testable. It's not just saying the pictures shall not be too big. Well, what's too big mean? We're saying here 50K is what we're assigning to it. If we want to change it later on, we could, but at least we give some measure by which things happen. So the alternative to this, now that we looked in details, is numbered shalls. And the bullet points, we can't really tell the story as we talked about. Everything's kind of broken up, and it's tougher to read because of just each of them's intentionally so separate from all the rest. They're distinct. So one of the alternatives is we can keep free-form text. We can tell the story, but we slip in where the shalls are and number them accordingly. So, for instance, I could tell a story like this. This is long form. The system needs to be available to users in formats, so the user interface shall. Okay, so basically the bullet point we saw before now has a little bit of, the first half a sentence there is context. the requirement is the user interface shall be available for Android 9 OS devices. Same thing we saw before. For mobile apps, the device shall, again, number 2 inside of there, be able to save pictures while the web shall allow uploads. Okay, so a little bit more description. So we have 2 different testable requirements inside of there. Mobile application directly takes pictures. The web application allows uploads. We can see flows inside of there. It's telling a little bit, more detailed story. So again, we saw the requirements and details here. This is an alternative way to do it. The nice thing about this is, again, it's freeform. The tough thing, it's sometimes hard to find all the requirements, but there are tools that help you manage requirements using this approach that make these little hypertext type things. Each numbered shell pops up, and so this works very nicely as well. So which one should you use? Well, it's up to you. Again, I'd like you to try use cases, but you need to capture this type of thing for at least non-functional requirements. There are no use case equivalent for non-functional requirements. So do you want to do them bullets? Well, that's fine. They're easy to manage. They have a limited storytelling ability, but there's tool support for them. I mean, you could just put a table out there and you have numbered items inside of there, or you can use the ordered list, or as you saw the numbering system I did, the RQ1 approach. The numbered ones we saw, you just have to be careful in how you track them and making sure you are writing distinct shalls, that you're still writing cohesive, good, clear sentences that says what the system shall do and getting that out of that. So those are the 2 ways you can go through and capture requirements as we go through this phase. So consider them. And we're going to go through there. Now we're going to talk about non-functional requirements next in more detail. So this was an intent to say, hey, this is everything you need to know about it. So we'll talk about it in more detail, but this is the mechanism by which we can capture both functional and non-functional requirements, where use cases is just for capturing functional requirements.